So, Max Hart, huh? I must admit that I'm not entirely blind when it comes to going into Pretty Cure. With something as big as this series, I did indeed do my research before just diving headlong into it after all. And by the time that I'm writing these retrospectives, I'm already knee deep into watching the next series that follows it, so I have some perspective on what's coming up, just not everything. That's how I know this is one of only 2 sequel seasons that the series has ever done. And I would love to know if that's because they weren't well received by the public or because they just realized that they don't work. Because while there are some things that I like about Max Hart, I don't really think there was ever a path forward from this point in terms of making something. Max Heart is really just more of what came before with a few tweaks. Many of these tweaks were things I liked, but the baggage of being a sequel also holds the series back somewhat. It's odd. I think that I like this season ever so slightly better, but the things that annoyed me about Futari didn't really vanish, and in some cases were more infuriating than they were before. Unlike the prior season, this time around the season is all one storyline, which has streamlined things somewhat. However, it does have a bit of a problem that I worried about, that it would feel like something of a victory lap after the second half of Futari already felt like one in the first place. It does feel a little more justified in that the events of this season come as a pretty direct result of the finale of the first season, though. It's 1 year after the start of the original series, and after the end of the last run, Meppel, Mipple, and Poloon are still hanging out completely dormant, which the girls are understandably sad about. While I may be no fan of these mascots, the girls went through a lot with them, and that is something to consider when thinking about their feelings. It's a little unclear exactly how long it's been since the mascots have been asleep, but I'm going to assume it hasn't been that long, given that the series started airing just the next week after the original ended. Time compression and expansion is a little wonky with a series like this, but for these seasons, it seems that each one is meant to emulate about a year, just like the timetable that they air on. Either way, these girls are missing their little mascots a bit, but it doesn't seem to be holding them back much as they head out to school. We then get to pay a visit to the Garden of Light again, the place the girls worked so hard to save last season, which seems to be in pretty good shape thanks to all their hard work. However, everything is not peachy keen given that the Queen was indeed very injured as a result of that last clash with the Dark King. As a result, she breaks apart into 3 pieces that then get scattered into the regular world: her heart, her life, and her 12 wills. So, it's really 14 pieces, but we'll clump those wills together since they're more of a category, I suppose. At the same time that this happens, a strange girl appears in the human world, so she's obviously connected to this in some way. If you're a grown adult, you can likely make a solid guess how, since the show's not exactly playing the concept too shy, but hey, it gives the kids a little something to wonder about. At the same time, a new set of villains have all moved back into that manor from the second half of the first season, intent on doing something to resurrect the last season's big bad that I didn't talk much about in my last Pretty Cure video because he wasn't all that interesting to begin with. They have a small child with them who we can assume is also somehow related to everything that's going on, but obviously we won't get into that until the end of the season. Danger strikes because new villains, the mascots wake up, and Pretty Cure is back in action. It doesn't take long before we realize that we've got to gather up all the pieces of the Queen and fix her before the villains can resurrect their boss, and try and stop the villains from doing that in the first place along the way. We meet up with that strange girl pretty quick, and she, unsurprisingly, turns out to be plot relevant and gets to help out in the magical battles. From there, it's the standard weekly adventures until we hit the mid-season and the season finale, where things go a little extra nuts. Same formula as last time around, really, but this time with some extras to shake things up. The biggest sin of this season is that it does indeed feel like something of a victory lap like the second half of Futari did. It's also quite repetitive, even lifting some of the plot points from Futari to do them all over again. Because at this point, we are running out of ideas of what to do with these characters a little bit. But with the plot rolling along, let's get a quick look at how our characters are looking now that they're another year older, and some are getting more focused than they did before. Honoka and Nagisa are very much the same characters that they were the first time around. Little has changed about them and their circumstances, but the changes that are there do have something of an impact, So let's get into them, starting with Nagisa, just like we did last time. Nagisa is still the more flawed character of the original duo, giving her the most room to grow, and as a result, she still does get a lot of the focus. But I feel like that is tempered somewhat for reasons that we'll get into later. She's still getting up to the same sorts of things, though. The biggest change for her is that she's given a lot more responsibility in her life. This season starts about a year after the first one did, so she has indeed moved up a grade, which makes her a more senior member of the lacrosse team. She's also been made the captain as well, though, so there's even more on her shoulders. This is something we can see her initially struggling with, but she also adapts to it fairly well, which, given the way the show can sometimes make her the butt of the joke, I was a little proud to see her do. Like I said last time, Nagisa's not stupid, but it does seem that she needs something to actively engage her in order for her to excel. There's an episode where Nagisa is left to handle the chores at home when her mom is going to be out and ends up slacking off until she's prodded into actually getting things done. Well and fine enough and good and all in character. The thing is that Honoka ends up giving her some tips on cooking in order to help her get through it. When she does cook dinner for her father and brother that night, her brother brushes her efforts off and downplays it by pointing out the way that Honoka helped her out. However, her father doesn't do that. He acknowledges the effort that Nagisa put in, which I think is really sweet and a really important thing to be shown to kids. Even if Nagisa's food looked better than it tasted, the effort she put in was real and deserving of being paid attention to. The only other thing that gets a lot of focus for her is the romance subplot. Now, I mentioned last time around that the way the show handles things, I was more liable to believe that something was going to happen with Honoka and Nagisa rather than Nagisa and Fuji, the guy that Nagisa is crushing on, who I didn't even mention by name last time because he is so inconsequential. He's actually around a little bit more this season, and we do get some more direct interaction between the two of them, but it's still never anything that feels like it's making progress. It's always just part of Nagisa's status quo. It is something that feels like it has more of a presence, though. For instance, we've progressed to actually talking to Fuji on a regular basis instead of sighing from afar, which is something, I guess. However, this didn't see any resolution either. The last we see of this subplot is in the 42nd episode, which is the second to last one before the episodes that basically make up the 4-part finale to the series. In this episode, we have Honoka being the ultimate wingman all day, only for Nagisa to shout her feelings where nobody but Honoka hears as a sort of practice run for confessing, only for her to back out at the last minute the second she's face to face with Fuji again, seemingly content with being a coward. This is a subplot that is just plain frustrating at the end of the day. In the first season, it was something that I could largely ignore because while it was part of the series, it was more minor compared to some of the other parts of the show. However, it got much more of a spotlight in the second season, only to build up to a whole lot of nothing. Part of me wonders if there was maybe meant to be one more season with these girls before they decided to shake things up, and this plot line was meant to be resolved there. But it's also entirely possible that this was just something that the writers weren't interested in resolving in the first place, leaving Nagisa in perpetually that place of her first love. Honoka is given a little more to do this season, thankfully. That was one of my big complaints from the original series, that Honoka wasn't allowed to have as much focus put on her flaws and growth, which led to her feeling a little less developed than Nagisa. That's been rectified this time around. She's not given a ton more, granted, but I'll take what I can get. Something is better than nothing after all. Like Nagisa, Honoka has been given some more responsibility in her life and in a very similar way. She may not be the captain of a sports team, but she is the head of her science club this time around. One thing this does is give us more time with the science club girls, since there are more direct episodes about Honoka and her club than there were in the original Futari wa. Honoka doesn't take as naturally to leadership as Nagisa did, but that makes sense for her. After all, she's a little more of a reserved character and isn't exactly a commanding presence unless she's doing her whole magical girl thing. This does get us more episodes with the science club, and these tend to focus on the relationship that Honoka has with the club and her leadership position within it. Her specific struggle is with how others in the club sort of look to her to be the decision maker and the final call on a lot of things. Honoka not having a super strong inclination to certain projects over others due to a general love of science rather than having a specific focus means that she ends up being kind of a pushover at times. So her character moments come in the form of her finding her voice or finding a compromise for the members of the club. It's not a whole lot for her to do, admittedly, but it's definitely more than we got with her last season, so I will take what I can get. The rest of the season sees her continuing to be a support to other characters and a sounding board for their problems, which is something she's always kind of excelled at due to being one of the most level-headed people in the room most of the time. We do even get to see a little more of a flawed side to her than we usually do. There's a point where we see her unable to handle some stress, and she gets a little snippy with the people around her as a result. That's not something we really got last season, and I was really glad to see the side of Honoka in that moment, though I do wish it was something that we could have seen more of in general. I would have more of an issue with her not getting more to work with in terms of screen time, but she's no longer splitting that screen time with just one other person, and thus there is less screen time for her to try and monopolize. So let's get into the reason for that. The whole new main character. Hikari is an interesting case. She's a character that's sprung fully formed out of nowhere as a seemingly 13-year-old girl. She doesn't have a full grasp on the world around her, though she seems to understand some of the basics of human interaction. Otherwise, she's something of a blank slate. The show actually plays a little coy with what exactly her deal is for the first few episodes. It's clear that there's something off with her, but it's not clear what yet. Despite it being somewhat obvious that she's got something magical going on with the way she sorts out her living situation by seemingly hypnotizing someone into believing she's always been part of their family. It's not until the 5th episode where she actually gets to be more deeply involved in what's going on when she turns out to be a whole new magical girl, shiny luminous. Yeah, she's not actually a pretty cure. From what I understand, there used to be a sort of rule in place that the only ones who could be pre-cures were regular girls. Anyone else could have magic powers and even transform, but they couldn't get that sweet, sweet cure title before their name. This seems to have fallen by the wayside over time, though. In fact, I'm 90% sure there's a mermaid pre-cure in one of the seasons that I haven't gotten to yet. It's a little silly that we can't just call her Cure Yellow or Cure Pink or something like that, but for all intents and purposes, Shiny Luminous is another pre-cure that gets added to the team. One that doesn't have to hold hands with anyone to transform. Hikari doesn't really have a linear arc over the course of the season, but more of a general running through line that culminates in specific moments. There's no A leads to B leads to C, but more scattered moments that end up feeling more important in retrospect. Her whole thing this season is basically learning how to human, and learning both about herself and the world around her. There's little things, like her having to figure out the shopping, learning about basketball, and having to ask what it means to have a crush on someone. But there's also moments where she's kind of just left sitting there, not understanding what her purpose is, why she exists, and how she ended up where she did. It's not like she has amnesia. There's no sense that she's forgotten something, but more that she just didn't exist before this moment, and she's not sure what caused her to now. That's something she has to grapple with and can leave her feeling a little out of step with the world around her at times. However, the fact that she's even willing to try in that situation is really commendable. That's the overall of what's going on with her over the course of the season, but it's not like this is something that comes up every episode or something like that. There are times where she's just living her life like she's a normal girl, and as a normal girl, I really like her. She's on the more reserved side like Honoka is, but in a way that's a little more stoic rather than cheerful. However, when she does show emotions and smile, it's really sweet, and over the course of the season we get to see her feel more and express herself, which is some really lovely growth. It helps that it's made pretty clear that she's a hard worker when she sets her mind to something, which is endearing and makes you want to root for her. The one missed opportunity with Hikari is that she doesn't really shake up the group dynamic all that much. Granted, I don't want her to go driving a wedge between Honoka and Nagisa or anything of that nature, but it's not like there's anything that changes due to the fact that she's around. She assimilates with the other girls, and they simply become a trio rather than a duo. There's not really anything terribly wrong with that, but I do think there was a chance to show off the way that their relationships with Hikari are different than their relationship to each other, if that makes sense. She's not so much a change to the status quo as much as she's just a new friend. Unlike the first season, the side characters this time around are somewhat more distinct than they were before. In fact, there are some that get explicit focus rather than just being one of the blob of many that are hanging around the peripherals of our main duo. Well, Fuji P is around a lot more, like I mentioned when we were talking about Nagisa earlier. In the first season, there wasn't more to him than just being a cute, sporty boy that Nagisa could pine after. This time around, well, there's still not that much to him, admittedly, but we actually get to see some personality out of him rather than just watching him from a distance the entire season. He's just kind of generically nice and considerate while being passionate about the things he enjoys. In terms of love interests, we could do worse, I suppose. But it's not like he's anything unique in the love interest landscape either. The character that really makes me bring up side characters at all is Akane. Akane did show up last season, but she was fairly superfluous to everything going on and didn't show up all that often. She was plenty fine, but it wasn't like she was a standout character aside from a little bit of being a role model to Nagisa. Her deal is that she's someone who went into the workforce but wasn't really completely satisfied with her life when she did that. So she quit her presumably corporate job to open up the Taco Cafe, a food truck that is generally a takoyaki stand, but depending on the episode, might be serving up something else as well. In the second season, Akane is actually around a lot more, appearing in what feels like a majority of the episodes, though I admit I wasn't keeping count. This is because she ends up acting like Hikari's guardian during the season. She introduces Hikari to the girls as her cousin, but there's clearly some sort of magic reality rewriting going on to make her believe this. We're not going to think too hard about the moral implications of that, though, because that's a whole can of worms that we don't really have time to unpack. Either way, now, instead of being something of a minor mentor figure, she becomes a more consistent one, serving as a good example to the girls of what hard work can get you. I like her. Most of the adults that are around these girls are family or authority figures. It's good that they can have an adult that they have a more casual relationship with that can still give them advice on the level that they need. She's energetic enough to match Nagisa's energy, which I can only assume is from her past as a lacrosse player. Akane also serves another great purpose. With Hikari working at the food truck with her on a regular basis and the girls being friends, it gives us a new excuse to go more places. If Akane is taking the truck somewhere different for the day or for the weekend, it's easy for the other girls to come along too, providing a change of pace for the episode. So we've talked humans. Let's talk mascots. Mepple and Mipple are largely unchanged from where they were last season. In fact, it's not like they got up to anything in the time between that might have changed them. They were basically comatose between seasons, sleeping inside their cell phone forms until the start of the series reactivated them. So if you want my thoughts on them, I suppose you can go back to my video on Futari, but I didn't have that much to say about them back then either. They're just annoying and problem causers until Polun shows up and they're a little more responsible as he takes up the annoyance role. Oh yeah. Polun. Okay, so I don't like Polun much. He was my least favorite character in the last season, and I made it pretty clear that this is a Polun hate account. However, I will admit my feelings have changed ever so slightly when it comes to him, because this season he is no longer the giver of power-ups, but is instead an actual partner to one of the girls, namely Hikari. And I'll be damned, hanging out with Hikari actually made him somewhat tolerable. Hikari and Polun form something of a bond early on. They end up wanting to watch out for each other and protect each other in what ways they can. It's actually kind of funny that both of these third wheel sort of characters to the main duos of Honoka and Nagisa and Mepple and Mipple ended up forming a duo of their own. At a certain point, it's clear that Polun has grown up a little and starts to take his job as Hikari's partner a little more seriously. Don't get me wrong, he is still kind of whiny like the other two, but he's no longer just whiny and there to be captured by the bad guys. He's got something of a purpose and a relationship which redeems him from being just a hate sink for me. I won't say I love him, but he's better. However, for every rise, there must be some kind of fall, and we do get that here because Polun is no longer being the singular source of annoying whining. We get a whole new character to be that. Lulun is another mascot character that is even younger than Polun because she is his younger sister. It is an absolutely wild thing for them to add in because he was just getting to the point of being tolerable, and they had to send in something new to sweep up his old position as resident annoyance. She does serve as the new almighty giver of power-ups, even having a computer form to match with the one that Poland previously had, since he is no longer a laptop, but a compact instead. At the very least, she seems to have more control over when she gives her power-ups, since it is no longer a game of waiting for her to get upset and yell like Poland did. However, she did make me really notice the way that the mascot characters spend a lot more time in their mascot forms than they used to. It was a plot point in the first season that the mascots could not maintain their mascot plushie shape for a very long time when they were in the regular world, which is why they spent a lot of time in their little cell phone forms. However, that was something that seemed to get less consideration the longer the season went on, and at this point seems to have been nearly entirely forgotten about, since all the characters are in their marketable mascot forms far more often. Of course, we could make the argument that they will still spend the majority of their day in their item forms because of all the time they are in them while the girls are at school. However, early in the first season, it seemed like they could only be mascot shaped for maybe a few minutes at a time. In this season, Polun and Lulun have an episode where they are mistaken for plushies and taken by a little girl as a result, and stay in their mascot shape the whole time that they are with her. I understand it's far more convenient for the characters to be able to pop back and forth as they please, but at the same time, it would have also been nice to have the consistency maintained. You'll notice that I've gone off on a bit of a tangent from talking about Lulun in all of that, and that just proves that there is not anything super remarkable about her. My main takeaway is that she was annoying and whiny, and that's about all, because I can't remember much about her beyond that, which is disappointing. I suspect it was just a factor of her being added as a character late in the season that is also not a human. She's not allowed to interact with a lot of the larger cast of the show, lest she reveal herself, so the options of what kind of stories they can do with her are limited. Most of what they could do with her was already done with Polun last season, so she spends much of her time being lumped in with the others without a whole lot to do, except be the new obligatory child mascot. In general, I don't think she needs to exist, but I will willingly admit that she has the cutest design of the four of them, and I am sure moved her share of plushies back in the day. The most noticeable thing that I remember about her, other than her whining and crying, is the fact that her introduction episode is treated like something of a horror episode for most of it, with Lulun being mistaken for some kind of ghost in the school. And since we've talked about all the characters on the side of the good, we might as well talk about the villains. Honestly, I wish there was more I could share with you about the villains, but unfortunately this is a case where there's just not a lot to distinguish them. They are there, and they serve their function, but there's not a lot notable about them. Once again, it's a case where we just have one come after the girls at a time in order to advance their plans, but the attacks don't super often feel like they blend into the larger story of the episode, just like last season, and the villains themselves aren't interesting enough on their own that they're entertaining. Most of the time, they're either just sitting around and plotting, being evil for the sake of being evil, or bickering with one another. Granted, that bickering dynamic is something that is a little different than last time around, I'll give the show that, but it's not something that's fun to sit through either. I understand that this is one of those stories that's going for a very straightforward good versus evil type of adventure, but at the same time, it would have been nice for the villains to have any sort of depth to them at all. They are trying to resurrect the Dark King that was defeated at the end of last season, sure, but there's not really any reason given for it. It seems to be more of a just because situation, or more accurately, because they're the bad guys. The only other mode they have is dealing with the fact that there is a child in the manor with them, which could have led to something interesting, but only ends up filling time with slapstick hijinks. The kid doesn't seem all that bad either, just a normal, 4-year-old. From what I can see, he sounds a lot like some of the toddlers that my teacher friends work with. Hell, he could have been worse and turned into some kind of Caillou kid, but he's fairly normal in this grand scheme of things. I don't know, they're not all that interesting, so I don't have that much to say about them. So let's talk about how we deal with them instead of talking about them in specific. Fights generally run the same way they did last time around. The only difference is that the girls are more experienced than they were the last time, and their costumes are ever so slightly different. There is a sense that they are more powerful than before in general, though. Based on the way that things play out in the first episodes, it seems that when they transform now, Hanukkah and Nagisa have the boosted level of physicality that their power-up gave them in the last season just innately from the start, which is a cool level of progression to see. You might think that adding a new magical girl into the mix might shake things up, but that's not really the case. Hikari brings a few new tools to the table, but it's not all that much. For the most part, she functions as a support character to the other two. She alternates between being able to momentarily immobilize the enemy that they're facing and powering up the big laser that the other two are able to pull off. She's a booster, not a real fighter. That's not to say she doesn't do anything at all. In fact, because she doesn't need to hold hands with anyone like the other two, she's actually able to transform independently. There are a few times where she ends up transforming before the other two in order to hold off whoever they're facing in that episode. Those moments are nice to see, not only for the way that they shake up the formula, but also for the way that they show the growth that Hikari has gone through as a fighter and the confidence that she has gained given the way that she visibly hesitated at first when it came to engaging in fights. What ends up standing out about her addition, though, is the way that her animations for her transformations and attack feel really long in comparison to Hanukkah and Nagisa. Part of that is likely because these long animations are just for one girl instead of being shared between two of them. However, there is a lot of just posing and sparkling that happens with some of her animations, though there are times where these get visibly trimmed down to suit the runtime of the episode. The animations all end up stacking up and can take up minutes at a time of the episode. At some points, we can end up with episodes where we have 5 different animations that are repeated between episodes. You'll have Hanukkah and Nagisa's shared transformation, Hikari's transformation, Lulun giving Hikari the power-up that she can grant, Hanukkah and Nagisa getting their power-up bracer to appear, and finally the big attack of the episode from Hanukkah and Nagisa, which may or may not be boosted by Hikari. The amount this adds up to means that less time is spent on the combat, which was always the more interesting part of any altercation in the series, and where a lot of the cooler animation came from. And that's a shame, because the animation this season feels stronger and like it has more impact. Instead of just firing off their laser, the girls have this quick moment where they seem to almost charge it before letting it fly. When Hikari gives their big blast a boost, there's a visible flow of power from behind them that blasts at their hair and costumes like a gust of wind. The transformations themselves even seem more dynamic. When their costumes show up, Nagisa's pose here is like a girl that's ready to go. She is feral. She is going to rip you apart. And Hanukkah looks like she's being flung forward into the fight, nearly skydiving into the action. Then they land and Nagisa just slams down on the ground while Hanukkah pulls off a sick backflip. It's got a lot more weight than it did before, emphasizing that these girls are going to kick your ass. Which makes the fact that so much of their fights is eaten up by lengthy stock animations feel even more disappointing. Even worse is that there is one time I can specifically remember where Hikari transforms for a fight only to do absolutely nothing in the fight after that, meaning she might as well not have transformed in the first place like she did in another episode. However, we'll forgive her because of this moment where she is absolutely adorable, looking like every kid at their first state fair. Lulun's addition to the team meant that I was worried we would end up with the same power-up problem from last season where we're just waiting around for the mascot to get upset enough to pour the power on. It was pretty clear that had to be what her purpose was when she was introduced, given that she came in partway through the season when a power-up would feel justified, and with Polun as Hikari's partner now, he can no longer serve as the almighty giver of power-ups. However, at times it feels like she might as well not be there. Her power-up that she is able to give to Hikari shows up just 2 episodes after her introduction, but is seemingly also created from the bond that Lulun and Hikari have formed, one that I cannot believe in due to the short time span in which it came to be. Then there is the fact that nearly every time Hikari's transformation will finish, only for Lulun's powering up animation to start immediately after, turning one big stock block into an even bigger one. It ends up feeling like Hikari should just transform with the brooch added on right away, or that her transformation should have changed to include both of her buddies instead of just one. Lulun, as a result, feels lacking a purpose. It's not like she gives a power-up to the main girls as well, just to Hikari. The others have a new power-up that is just granted to them by the universe. From there, the rest of the season plays out a good deal like the first season did, with episodic slice-of-life adventures being interrupted by the Monster of the Week formula coming in and shaking up their daily lives. Like last season, a lot of these feel incredibly disconnected from each other, though there are a few cases where they tie nicely together. Those generally come from moments where there are bigger plot than just the Monster of the Week shenanigans going on. Like when the girls have to travel back to the lake where they first found the Hopish in the first season to figure out how to power themselves up for the second half of the season. However, this level of proactivity is rare given the way the series likes slice of life so much. Don't get me wrong, I like the slice of life elements too. It's important to have those things so we know what the girls are fighting to protect after all. However, I'd prefer if the two sides of the series were able to integrate with each other more. It doesn't need to be every episode, I know how tough that can be, but it should be more than once in every 7 to 10 of them. What I'm saying is more episodes like the school play episode this season where Nagisa is struggling with a physical stunt task and figured out the way she needed to move for it in the process of dealing with the fight of the week. It was a simple and straightforward way to incorporate the two into each other. The level of disconnect was exceptionally apparent in the pair of episodes where the plot revolved around the potential that either Honoka or Nagisa might have to move away. Nagisa's was first, playing on the idea that she might have to move away due to her father's work. This is a pretty relatable problem for a kid to have, so it's understandable. However, the entire episode, her main concern is that if she moves, it would likely be far enough away that she would have to transfer schools. Which, I get it. It sucks to have to change schools and not be able to see your friends as much, if at all, anymore. I went through that myself. However, over the course of the episode, not once is the problem that the girls would not be able to continue being Pretty Cure brought up. They have to hold hands in order to do anything. If they're living hours apart, the whole basis for their magical girl work falls apart. When this subject matter comes up with Honoka, some lip service is at least paid to this idea, but the fact that it's often treated like a secondary concern just shows how wide the gap is between these two halves of the series. Almost like a slice of life episode was written to not be about Precure at all, and then the Precure elements are crowbarred in after the fact. The level of plot convenience is also pretty high this season. I started taking notes after a certain point just how much there was people around the girls going unconscious for absolutely no reason, just so that they wouldn't see any of the magical stuff going on. Granted, there was a lot of convenient passing out in the last season too, but at least the show tried to come up with a reason why they passed out, instead of everyone passing out suddenly being the first signal to the girls that something was going on. It also stands out that the villains this season got strangely considerate of the girls' private lives. There are points where they just teleport the girls out of whatever they were doing in order to have their weekly fight with them. It feels odd, given that these characters don't care for this world, that they would make sure to preserve the secrecy of the magical girls they're fighting. It's a place where the writers taking shortcuts shines through, and while I can understand the desire to take a shortcut when there are this many episodes, it brings down the quality of the show in the long run, unfortunately. It makes it clear when something is being done for the convenience of the writer rather than the entertainment of the audience. So the season rolls on anyway, despite all this. Eventually, we get to the end, a big blowout that basically runs one final endgame story across 4 episodes that wraps up everything in a neat little bow. Obviously, at this point, everything has been collected up for the most part, and it's clear that Honoka and Nagisa are moving into a new phase of their lives as they hand over the leaderships that we've seen them take on in their extracurriculars to an underclassman in preparation for their own middle school graduations. Then Hikari vanishes, and everyone in the regular world seems to be forgetting about her, which is pretty disturbing since she's been living among them for many months at this point. There's been a clear connection between Hikari and the little boy from the mansion for a while now, since the mid-season climax had some weird stuff going on when they were face-to-face, and there was an implication that them meeting again could be even more problems. Well, now they're face-to-face again, and then they actually touch, which sends things really crazy. So, what's the deal here? Well, Hikari is one of the parts of the queen, which as an adult you've likely figured out by this point. Her magic objects are named after heart eels, which are another part of the queen. She looks pretty princessy when she transforms. And the big one, she appeared at the same time that the queen vanished and looks like an aged down version of the queen's design. It was pretty obvious, but hey, it's a kids' show, can't blame them for keeping things simple. Besides, a princess or a queen in disguise who doesn't even know it themselves, this is not the first time that has showed up in a magical girl show. Specifically, Hikari is the queen's life, or life force, I suppose, and the little boy, well, he is to the Dark King as Hikari is to the queen. He's basically the Dark King's life, which is why the villains have spent the whole season protecting him and keeping him away from Hikari. This is why the two interacting would presumably have some dangerous consequences. They are basically equal yet opposite forces. However, this vampire-looking villain that I haven't really talked about yet, since he, like the rest, is pretty boring until this point, says that he is the Dark King, or at least part of him anyway. There's a whole lot of energy being pulled from people and all that, but the end result is that the Dark King is revived and Hikari is pretty drained. Epic fights ensue. This time around, though, the fight is intercut with Hikari having to come to terms with herself, what she has experienced, and what she must do. It's actually a really impactful part of the series, since this is where a lot of Hikari's experiences really come to a head. On one hand, she has to fuse with the other parts of the queen in order to resurrect her and save everything that she's come to care about. However, on the other hand, if she does that, she will become nothing and just part of a whole again. She will have to give up on living in a world that she has come to love, a life that she has come to want for herself. She will sacrifice herself to save what she loves, and as a result, not get to have that for herself anymore. As the show puts it, because of her love for everyone, she must become the queen again, but it is that same love that prevents her from doing so. In the end, she makes what is really the only choice she can. She lets go of those earthly attachments and chooses to become part of the queen again to save everyone. And man, it hurts. It's an impactful part of the series after seeing Hikari live and grow and become part of the world. It gets harder when she goes to say goodbye to Honoka and Nagisa and even starts to cry when doing so. It's made clear that this is a big goodbye too, as it seems that all of the mascots will be going away with her as well, closing off this chapter for everyone involved. There's one last big burst of emotion and magic, the Dark King and Queen grappling as giants in the sky over Earth, and then we cut to Honoka and Nagisa's graduation. Everything is back to normal. They're regular girls again and able to move forward with their lives with the world safe at the cost of some dear friends. It's a bittersweet, but ultimately fulfilling ending. Except no, that's not what happens. After graduation, Honoka and Nagisa are sitting at the cafe as they have many times before, and they are congratulated on their graduation by Akane, then Hikari, who is just there, along with Polun and Lulun. Meppel and Mipple are there as well, resolved to stay with Honoka and Nagisa a while longer. Even the little boy from the mansion, who has been given the name Hikaru for the very first time in the whole series, is there too, and he's apparently living as Hikari's little brother now. And that short scene is how the series ends. It really does feel like an ass pull in the last few minutes. Once again, this is a case where I understand that the series is for younger kids and all, but this really just feels like not thinking kids can handle an ending that is either bittersweet or plain and simply sad. Do I like that Hikari is actually okay? Of course. Hikari is a darling, and I only want good things for her. But at the same time, I can feel that this ending scene kind of sours all the good feelings I had towards her genuinely well done goodbye scene. I also would have liked there to be at least a single line of explanation as to how this happened, given that we saw that the queen is back and settled on her throne in the Garden of Light, just as she was in the last season. Forever CG, forever unmoving. All we get is Hikari saying, "It turned out like this," which makes the whole thing feel like Deus Ex Machina so the kids won't feel too sad. I'm not upset that Hikari is alive and gets to live the life that she came to love. She deserves that after everything she's been put through. I'm upset that it undercuts basically the entire rest of the episode and as a result undercuts the climax of the whole series. I hope that if any future seasons have something like this, they actually commit to it, or at least commit halfway instead of this full reversal. Okay, moving on before I get sucked more into thinking about it, let's talk about something new this season had added to it. Movies. I've actually made myself a guide of when I am meant to watch each of the movies going forward, including the crossover ones. I don't expect that any of these will be anything absolutely groundbreaking, but at the same time, I feel like they're worth getting into for the sake of my experience consuming all of the Precure. Max Hart seems to have wanted to make up for the lack of movie in the last season, since this season has 2 of them. As far as I can tell, this was the only season to actually get 2 movies. While there might have been a double movie release for some of the other seasons, those releases would be split between the movie of the season that's coming out this year and this absolutely huge swath of crossover movies that I haven't gotten to yet since I'm not that deep into the series. So let's just do a quick flyover of these 2 movies, as there's not a whole lot to say about either of them, but I also want to be comprehensive. Both ended up feeling like an extended episode of the show that was branching off from the main narrative. That feeling helped along by the fact that each of them played the show's theme song early into the runtime. First off was Futari wa Pretty Cure Max Hart the Movie, creatively named since it was the very first one they made and clocks in at 71 minutes long. It's pretty simple and straightforward. As it branches off, this one decided to take on a theme to distinguish itself from the main series, and it's pretty clear that they were going for a whole musketeer motif with the whole gaggle of new marketable mascot characters that were added in just for the sake of this movie, never to be seen again afterwards. In this film, our trio of heroes gets essentially stolen away to a whole new realm that we have never seen before that houses its own queen, prince, and set of cute little mascots. There, the big task is to protect a set of magical jewelry from being snatched away by a new one-off villain. Like I said, it mostly feels like an extended episode that had slightly beefed up production values. The fights are well done, dynamic, and frequent, as this is a movie that is more focused on action and adventure than telling a super satisfying story. The main conflict, aside from the new villain, is that one of the mascots, this little blue one right here, is a bit of a jerk and doesn't want to help out and be a team player if the Pretty Cure girls are going to be involved with what's going on. He does eventually come around at the very end of things, of course, and there is a whole goodbye scene that I am sure is supposed to be heartfelt and touching, but it felt like pretty much nothing because I was still viewing him as a jerk due to the short runtime not making his turnaround fully believable. Part of the problem is we're never really given a full reason as to why he's like this. There's no reason why he doesn't want to be helpful, no tiny moment of a sad backstory with or without a flashback. He's just belligerent for no apparent reason until his mind gets changed. While I appreciate that there was a focus on the action for this one to make use of that extra runtime, it did cause the story to suffer, and I think a minute or 2 more to flesh this guy out could only have helped the movie. This one is pretty much skippable unless you really want to see this prince that's a weird clone of Fuji P for no explained reason. Hikari is there but doesn't have a ton to do in this movie either, so it's quite possible to watch this one and almost see it as being the movie that the first season never got. The second film is the one that has a little more meat to it, even if we have to have a little contrivance to get there. Second time is the charm though. In this one, we're off on a ski trip, taking in the snow and having a good time when 2 things happen. First, Hikari finds a strange egg that hatches into a baby phoenix, and second, Honoka and Nagisa get in a fight that is pretty stupid. It's that Nagisa is jealous that other people are looking at Honoka and Fuji P and mistaking them for being a couple, something we've already done and resolved in the main show before. However, what's refreshing about this is that they realize the fight is pretty damn stupid early on, and as a result, actually spend more of the movie trying to find the right time to apologize and make up, rather than actually fighting. The problem is that magic shenanigans keep getting in the way, which keeps things awkward between them and throws off their usual good chemistry. The whole point is to have a contrast between Honoka and Nagisa and the 2 villains of the movie who are able to get one over on them early on because their teamwork is more solid. As the movie rolls on, the teamwork of the girls gets stronger as they resolve their fight in correlation to the way that the teamwork of the villains starts to fall apart and they begin to fight. It's a nice little contrast to have going on. At the same time, Hikari is given a little more spotlight this time around, even if she doesn't spend a lot of time in the main fight with Honoka and Nagisa, thanks to how she's sort of bonded with this little phoenix, and her main goal is to just be at its side and protect it the whole time, even if that means facing off against the villains all on her own. Of the 2 movies, this is the more cohesive one, though it's not like there was super stiff competition. It has a little more for the girls to do in terms of their relationships, either to each other or to a magical mascot, and while the new characters are pretty thin, none of them are outwardly combative to the girls for no explicable reason either. This film is also the one where we get some Precure on Precure fighting when we have a hand-to-hand combat scene between Honoka and Nagisa. That alone is worth watching the movie for in my eyes. I didn't know how much that was something I needed until I saw it. It's good stuff and really well done for something that's only a short portion of the runtime. Now, let's talk magic items. There's more this time around, but I'll still try to keep this relatively brief if I can. First up, we have all the damn communes. This is the category of items that relate to the mascot characters by a mascot living inside them when they're not in their squishy little plushy shape. 3 out of 4 of these are transformation items, and my feelings on those haven't changed much since the last time around, but we'll still touch on them anyway. The Heartful communes are the new forms for Mepple and Mipple for Honoka and Nagisa to be able to transform with. Yeah, they got changed up from the forms of last season into these new ones to do a few things, like sell more toys, reset the status quo, and justify the way the girls have powered up this time around. They're still vaguely cell phone shaped, which does allow them to keep the same appeal of a cell phone feeling a little grown up to little girls back in the day. However, this time the phone shape is a little more fantastical, and it does this fun thing where it spins around, which does give it a little more toy appeal. The cards that go with these are still around too, though they're heart-shaped this time to give them a little more pizzazz along with the new shape of the toy. Once again, the cards are what makes it feel more like a toy to me and what makes me feel marketed to, but also those felt like they came up less often this season as well, so that's something of a trade-off, I suppose. Then there's the Touch Commune, which is Hikari's transformation item when Poloon grows up and stops being a laptop. Here he takes on more of the form of a makeup compact, small and easy to tuck away out of sight, unlike his former form. He really functions in the same way as the other 2 transformation items, so my feelings stay the same. I've gotta say, this is a much cuter look for him than the laptop vibe from before, though. The last of the communes is the one that Lulun has, which is the Miracle Commune. This one is one that takes on more of the laptop shape like Poloon had last season, as I've already made my dislike for Lulun quite clear, and the fact that I don't think she served any battle utility, this one felt pretty unneeded in my eyes. It's one of those ones that just feels like another thing for the pile, you know? It's barely worth talking about. All of these come up in just about every episode after they're introduced, so they at least feel like they're a consistent part of the story, even if you can tell that they're meant to sell you some kind of toy. After the communes, we have a new set of notebooks that the girls get. These come up infrequently and in less plot-relevant ways than the diaries of last season. All these serve to do was make me think about what happened to last season's diaries and how much stationery these shows must move due to school supplies for kids. And then we have what I'll call the battle items. These are the ones that show up in those stock animations that we see all season, which goes to show just how much they're around. First up, we have the ones for Honoka and Nagisa. They get the sparkle bracelets, which is very much the same as the other bracers they got last season, though this time they're not granted by any mascots, but more the universe itself. This grants a general power-up just like the last ones did, and make that big old laser that they do even bigger and badder. Once again, they have a design that very much comes off as looking like a toy, but it's tempered a little by having this nice pretty flowing ribbon on each of them. That ribbon is my sticking point, though. It's the focal point of the design, and it's animated very nicely in the show, but when it comes to the toy, that ribbon is hard plastic, which is just disappointing. If I were a little kid who was trying to play Precure back in the day, I would have wanted a flowy ribbon when I was waving around that big chunk of plastic strapped to my arm. Hikari doesn't get one of the bracers, though. Instead, she has a weapon right from the start, the Hartiel baton. It's this nifty little thing that can be either straightened out into a baton or take on this sweet heart-looking shape, both of which are kind of swoopy and curly, which gives them a nice princessy look that goes along with the everything to do with her aesthetic. This does have another form that's seen only in the second movie, which is apparently called the Shiny El Baton. I admit that I like both, but honestly, I didn't even notice the difference when I watched the movie. I only realized that there were 2 different versions when I found images for the toy version of the movie color scheme. Overall, I don't mind Hikari having her own special item. If you were going to give her something and you refuse to actually call her a pretty cure, it makes sense that what she gets would be pretty different from what the other girls do to distinguish her further. I also like the way that it's used in her stock attacks and looks to be a sort of way to channel her powers. Hikari is also the character granted a power-up from Lulun, which is the Hartiel brooch item. This basically transforms the pendant that Hikari already had on her costume into a fancier version, and acts as her general power-up item like the bracers are for the other 2. It also grants her a touch more utility by allowing her to use a shield in addition to the other 2 attacks that she usually has. It's fine, but also pretty unnecessary. The only other magical item we have to talk about then is the Queen Chariot, the only one that actually annoyed me. Now, with having something that we're meant to collect, it makes sense that there would be an item that is meant to store those collected things. The Chariot, this little throne-looking item, is where the hardtails get stashed after they're found and go inside it willingly. I've got no problem with that. What I do take issue with is how this item enters the narrative. Keep in mind that the last item like this was Hopish, which did require a moment of proactivity from our heroes to find, including a face-off with a bear in the woods. The Chariot, on the other hand? Oh, it just shows up in Higuri's bag one day. That's all. The fact that there wasn't any effort for this to be earned in any way is frustrating, especially when you consider that this is one of the pieces of the queen that needs to be found. It represents her heart in the heart, life, wills trifecta. Now, we can assume that it just kind of felt naturally attracted to Hikari in trying to reform the queen, but even with that in mind, it might have been nice if this was something that our team had to find instead of it just magically dropping into their laps. While we're talking about the magic items, I do want to just step aside and take a moment to talk about the looks for each of these girls and rank them from worst to best. Transformation and costumes are a big appeal of the magical girl genre, and I would be remiss if I didn't spend at least a little time on that. The only reason I didn't for last season is because there were only 2 outfits there, and it felt right to wait until the end of Honoka and Nagisa's run to talk about their costumes. We've got 9 to talk about, so let's just run this down real quick, and if you don't care, you can just skip to the next chapter of this video. In 9th place is Golden Shiny Luminous. The golden variations were the power-up that was introduced and contained in only the first movie, and to me, all it did was downgrade the looks on everyone by dipping them in yellow paint. Hikari got it the worst though. Since she already has all that yellow hair, she just turned into one big indistinct blob of yellow that I find a little hard to look at. In 8th place is Golden Cure Black. Once again, all that yellow just makes things sort of blend together when Nagisa's outfit was always made to look great by the contrast between the black and the pink, so making her all yellow sucks a lot of the fun out of it. She fares slightly better since she doesn't have a ton of blonde hair getting in the way, but it's not great. 7th place goes to what I'm going to call Phoenix Cure Black. I've also seen this referred to as Super Cure Black though. It's the temporary power-up from the second movie. My problem here is that it's just way too busy. There's too much going on and none of it feels very cohesive. That's all topped off with the way that her hair gets much bigger. Nagisa's hair always got a touch bigger when she transformed, but in this case it's so over the top that it feels unbalanced. 6th place goes to Phoenix Shiny Luminous. It's overdesigned as well, but in this case it works a little better since the frills feel like a more natural extension of her already kind of frilly and princessy look. My only problem is the way that instead of remaining white, there was a bit of a yellow or cream tinge added to the whites, which doesn't really work when you have doubled the amount of yellow in the look by doubling all her bright yellow hair. In 5th place, we have Golden Cure White. Once again, I don't really like any of the golden outfits, but this one is tempered slightly by the fact that Honoka has dark hair that can give something of a contrast, even if the entire look has still lost definition from being painted all the same color. 4th place goes to Phoenix Cure White. This is also over-designed, but I feel like it's a little less over-designed than the others. Something about this one kind of works for me, even if I could do without that big yellow bow plastered on the front. 3rd place is Shiny Luminous. She's a cute princess look that both looks like she fits in the lineup, but is also different enough to make her stand out. I like it, but she's not my favorite. The hair is a little bit much at times. 2nd place goes to Cure White. This is just very classic magical girl to me. The bell skirt and the ruffles are really fun. The only thing I don't like about it is that little top knot of a ponytail. If that had been cut or turned into a full ponytail, I probably would have liked it more. Which leaves Cure Black for 1st place. This took the classical magical girl look and made it sporty. I do prefer this version a little more than the crop top style of the first season as well. I love that she's got shorts, but there's also ruffles. She can be sporty and feminine at the same time. Those aren't mutually exclusive things, and I think that's wonderful. The last thing that I want to touch on is last time we talked about how much you could read into these gals being pals, so let's do that one more time. I guess we can consider this a running tally on just how queer each of the Precure seasons gets as we move through them. I'm not sure just how often this will be relevant, but I think it's an interesting thing to keep track of when talking about the genre. There's not much more here than last time around, but there's enough that it kept me wanting Honoka and Nagisa as a couple more than I wanted Nagisa and Fuji to be one, if that's anything. There's none of the girls having to be romantic partners in a play like last season, but there is a whole episode early on about how you can convey your feelings to someone else by holding their hand. This does put a lot of focus on the two girls holding hands quite a bit, which then resonates through the rest of the season given the way that they need to hold hands to transform and to do any of their big laser attacks. Hanukkah is also the only one to hear Nagisa when she admits her romantic feelings out loud, so you can read into that whatever you feel, I suppose. Either way, this is the couple that I would root for. And I think that just about covers everything with Futari wa Pretty Cure Max Heart. This ended up being a lot longer than I intended it to be, so I won't keep you around too much longer. I think this season was a natural follow-up to what came before, given that the series had not yet established a pattern of starting off with a different set of heroines in each season. While there were elements that I liked a lot in comparison to the first season, this season also had a pretty bad habit of maintaining or exacerbating the flaws that the first season already had, which isn't great. There's a lot of well-tread and recycled content here, and I find myself wondering if this season is worth the watch unless you're a completionist or unless you're really attached to these characters in particular. This season just isn't quite as fundamental as the first, unfortunately. When putting these up against each other, I would have to say I would likely give them the same numerical score, but Max Heart would rank slightly under Futari wa. However, I would be thrilled to hear what you think about this season, whether you feel differently or the same as me. Discussion is something that I really value. If you got this deep into the video, I'm afraid I do need to shill to you a little bit, and please ask that you do the whole like and subscribe rigmarole. Beyond me getting a sense of validation from seeing numbers go up, as a very small channel, these things are more of a boost to me than you might realize. Thanks so much for watching.